This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it's time for Avoid the Maze. You are special. Now, I have two different shows called Avoid the Maze, but Avoid the Maze, You Are Special is typically about people who have gone through some kind of endurance and they have said, hey, I can do this, even though so many of us, when we scrape our knee or get hurt in some way, we think, the world is against us. But the reality of it is, we all have abilities, even when we have a disability. And for those of you listening today or watching on YouTube, please make sure you go to the show notes because my guest has a very long bio, and I think it's really important that you read that in addition to listening to his words. So my guest today is Ken Kunken, and I was introduced to Ken through podmatch.com, and it was his lovely wife who suggested that we may want to have a conversation. And when I read your bio, Ken, I thought of so many times in my life when I got a medical diagnosis for something and thought, oh my God, my world is coming to an end. You know, how am I going to survive this? And yet I always found a way, because one of the things that I was taught growing up was you have to turn dirt into gold. And I may never be wealthy with a lot of gold, but I have a lot of gold in my heart. And when I read your bio, that's exactly what I saw about you. So if I understood it correctly, you were out playing football, and
Right.
football changed your life in a matter of seconds, really.
It sure did. In 1970, I was a junior at Cornell University, and I was on their lightweight football team. And when I made a tackle on a kickoff, I broke my neck and severely damaged my spinal cord. And as a result, I'm a quadriplegic. I'm almost totally paralyzed below my shoulders. I have a little bit of movement in my left arm, but nothing in my fingers or my wrist. And on my right side of my body, I could just shrug my shoulder a bit. So I need help doing virtually everything.
So you needed help doing just about everything, but you went on to college and got your degree, and at a time when we didn't have a lot of the adaptability that we have today. So how were you able to sit in a class and take notes or absorb everything that was going on? And how did you get to class?
That was a real challenge. See, I had the added misfortune of being injured about 20 years before the Americans with Disabilities Act took effect. And Cornell at that time was particularly inaccessible. I mean, virtually every one of its buildings had steps in front of it, and there was not one ramp or curb cut on the entire campus.
Wow.
So on my first day of classes, I had to be either pulled up or bounced down close to 100 steps just to attend my first day. So just getting to class was a challenge. Once there, I was not able to take notes myself because I was not able to write. So what I finally learned was appropriate for me was to find somebody in the class that would agree to put carbon paper under their notes so I'd get a carbon copy of their notes. And that's how I was able to go to class and get notes.
So here you are, your life changes, you're a young man, and young men going to college. Hey, the whole concept is, yes, I'm going to get a degree, but I'm going to find that young chick on the college campus. And life doesn't really look that way for you. So what gives you that excitement to say, hey, I'm going to still do this and get my degree and I'm going to live a full life?
Well, certainly there were a lot of challenges that went with my disability. I was very fortunate that I had a very supportive family who encouraged me to go back to school. I mean, I knew that as a result of my physical limitations, in order for me to have any chance of being successful, I had to make the most of my mental abilities. So I knew I needed to go back to school and get the best education possible. And my family basically assured me that if need be, they'd act as my arms and legs to make sure I could still do everything I wanted to do. So I was fortunate that with their encouragement, I went back to school. And I knew that I needed to work hard so I wouldn't disappoint them for all the effort
Sure.
they put in to helping me do what I wanted to do. And with a lot of help from personal care attendants and classmates, as well as my family, I was able to go back to Cornell and complete the final 2 years of my undergraduate degree in engineering during those next 2 years. So I'm the first quadriplegic to ever graduate from Cornell University.
So you get an engineering degree, and if I'm not mistaken from my knowledge about engineering, there's a lot of manual work that you have to do. Now, it starts in the brain, I get that, but now you have to start describing this to somebody else to implement it onto paper, correct?
Right. And back then, there were no laptop computers back
Right,
then. So that made it additionally difficult. And even when I took a computer science course, when I went back to Cornell, you had to key punch on cards. And I was not able to even do that.
right.
So while I graduated with a degree in engineering, I knew that it really wasn't a very viable field for me. And re, with the recommendation of one of my psychology professors, I decided that maybe it would be better if I pursued a career in the social services, particularly in counseling. This professor encouraged me to go into the field of counseling where I can encourage other people based on what I went through to help them deal with whatever adversities they were facing. So I remained at Cornell and I earned a Master of Arts degree where I majored in counseling and student personnel administration. But I knew that I still needed to increase my counseling credentials. So I then went for a second master's degree. This one was a Master of Education degree in psychological counseling and rehabilitation at Columbia University.
So you went to top universities. Obviously, you have a top brain in your head because as I'm listening to you, um, even if I had wanted to apply to those schools, uh, I was way down on that educational list. Um, and I know for me going to college, it was difficult. I had two legs I could walk. I could take my notes because I went to college way before computers as well. Um, and I struggled. And I struggled just because that's the nature of who I am. Okay. I'm that type of person that I want to know it before you tell it to me. And so as my professors were telling me things, I just like didn't hear them because it was like, but I already wanted to know it. Um, you obviously came from a different mindset right from the beginning. And you talk about having the support of your family. And you had the support of your family, like you said, before anybody even thought about supporting individuals with disabilities. In fact, we used to look the other way when somebody was in a wheelchair or on crutches or using a cane. How did you see the difference when you started counseling? Because when you started counseling, the laws weren't in effect yet either, correct?
Right. It was really difficult because, firstly, it was very difficult for me to get a job. I mean, here I was, I had just completed 2 degrees from Cornell, one from Columbia, 3 prestigious Ivy League degrees, 2 master's degrees, and no one would hire me. everyone seemed to feel I was just too disabled to work. And I looked for a job for a year before I finally found one organization willing to give me the chance to show what I could do. And that organization was Abilities Incorporated, which is located on Long Island, and they're part of what is now called the Viscardi Center. And they hired me to work as a vocational rehabilitation counselor. But I must say, when I first was in school and did some counseling, in college where they were teaching you what was involved with it, the people that I was counseling used to come in, look at me, and say, how can I tell you my problems when it looks like you have far more serious problems than I have? And I tried to reassure them that we all have issues that we need to deal with, and they're very real issues that are difficult for everybody.
Right.
And I tried to be supportive and understanding for what issues other people were facing as well. And I really enjoyed my work as a vocational rehabilitation counselor. And it was very gratifying for me now to be in a position where I could finally help others so that I wasn't just in the position where I was always receiving help.
Right.
Now I was able to give some of it back. And that's a tremendous feeling. It's great to be in a position where you can help others.
Well, I certainly understand that. I didn't think a lot about myself as I was growing up and becoming a parent and becoming an adult until my youngest son was born. And at age of 6, he was identified on the autism level. Yet one day he was neurotypical, the next day he was not.
Right.
And I spent the next 18 years of his life out there advocating and learning and trying to understand. And some people would even say to me, oh, your son looks normal. What do you know? And my comment was, I may not know, but I'm learning. And I'm learning as we go along because
Very.
there's always something about each of us that it's not perfect. We're always going to be reaching for it. But sometimes we need a little bit of help. And it's something that you seem to have, you had to adapt to it, but you adapted to it in a good way. You met your wife after all this happened, correct?
Correct. Right. In fact, I was in my 50s when I met my wife, and she has really changed my life in so many different wonderful ways. And we actually got married in 1953, shortly before I turned 53.
I love that. I love that. And I understand you have twin boys.
Close, we have triplet boys.
Oh my God, triplets. I read that wrong.
Yeah.
Wow. So this proves to us that even someone who has an injury, disability of any sort, can still find love, family, and be a contributor to society. And I'm hoping that my listeners will all come onto YouTube so they can actually see you because we have to stop running away from people that we think are disabled in some way. I saw it with my son. I mean, he looked, like I said, neurotypical, but because he had the label, people would say, oh, we better stay away from you and stay away from you and your husband because God knows what other things that you could, put a spell on us for. Um, how do you help people now that we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, but yet it still is not where it needs to be?
Well, I try to inspire and motivate as many people as I can to do more with their lives. And I try leading by example to show them what I've done in the face of a lot of adversity and to encourage them to do more with their lives. And I think one of the issues is people's perception of what somebody with a disability can do. I mean, far too often people have very limited expectations as to what somebody with a disability could do just because they need to go about doing a task differently than they do. And I think people need to learn to keep their expectations higher because many times a person's performance either rises or falls based upon what others expect of them. And it's so important to convince people not to listen to the naysayers. Just because something has not been done before doesn't mean you can't do it now. If you work hard, try your best, are not afraid to take chances, and continue to improve. And I think one of the most important things is maintaining a positive attitude. Keeping the right attitude can help you in virtually everything you do in life.
I mean, you are so right there. And sometimes, as I tell people and I write in my blogs, being positive doesn't mean that for 24 hours a day, we are always on that high feeling positive. There are going to be lows during the day. There's going to be something that's going to happen and you're going to say, oh, I feel miserable. But then you can pull yourself out of it. And I found that myself about 12 years ago. I was working in corporate America. I was counseling college students, loved what I did, hated the culture. The culture was killing me, but I loved what I did. But I had started wearing hearing aids. And so when I was one-on-one with my students, that was absolutely fine. But if I was walking down the hall with a coworker and they wanted to whisper something to me, it fell on deaf ears.
Right.
And I tried explaining that to them. And it was like, maybe you should retire. Maybe you are not able to do this job. And I was pushed out the door. And my youngest son said to me, so Mom, what do you really want to do? And I said, I want to help other people. I want to help people who are pushed out of their jobs to find out there is another job out there of some sort. And I wanted people to understand disabilities. I said, I never thought of my hearing aids as a disability, but the world does. So because they do, you know what? I'm going to use it. And I'm going to use your diagnosis as well. And he said, then go do it. And that's
Right.
what I've been doing. But it's sad because we think that all these little things that can humanly go wrong are terrible. We send our boys to school and we encourage them to become football players. And as parents, we don't stop and think about the injuries that can happen. So, what do you say to the parents who are pushing their kids to do things without the understanding of any kind of dangers ahead? Not that you may have stopped playing football. I'm not suggesting that. But were you aware of anything terrible that could have happened to you playing the game?
I knew that many people playing football were injured playing ball, but I didn't know anything about spinal cord injuries. I know that you could break your leg or damage your shoulder, and lately you hear more and more about concussions, but I didn't hear about spinal cord injuries back then. So I had no idea something like this could happen from playing football. And as a parent, I want parents to understand fully what the ramifications could be
Right.
in any sport that your child participates in, and to make sure you appreciate what the risks are, what the dangers are, and what the benefits are of staying physically active, and what you can learn from engaging in a competitive sport, and how that could help you grow, and how it teaches you teamwork as well. So you need to weigh the pluses and the minuses with respect to any athletic activity. And as a parent, that's part of your responsibility. Now, I enjoyed playing football because I liked the competition. I liked the physical aspects of it. but I never fully appreciated the dangers and the risks of it.
And I agree with you. I think that that's important no matter what our children are going to take part in or we're going to take part in. We have to know what those risks are and weigh them and say, if this does happen, it happens. It's gonna, it's in my fate, so to speak. But you're right, so many don't know, and they look at the gloriousness of, hey, my son is going to be the football captain. Um, we didn't allow my son to play football for a couple of reasons, and two of those main reasons were when he was very young, he had he fell outside playing and he got a concussion both times.
Mm.
And we just said, we're not going to take any chances you being out on the football field. And he wasn't a real fast runner to begin with. And so he probably would have been the first one knocked down. And he finally agreed. So he worked as a team manager. So he was part of the team. He, knew what was going on. And we helped him with that. Whereas we explained to him why we didn't want him to play. And when he finally understood, it was like, yeah, you're right. I'll be the first one knocked down, and I may not get all A's on all my courses, so I'm not going to take that chance. So today, you are still working as a coach or you're a writer. I think you have a book that we want to talk about as well.
Right. That's right. I recently wrote a book about my life. It's called I Dream of Things That Never Were, the Ken Kunken Story. It's out in hardcover on Amazon. In fact, if you go to my website, you can find other ways to purchase my book. My website is kenkunken.com, and I've recently recorded it as an audiobook, and that should be out shortly as well.
So number one, that's going to make a great holiday gift for everybody. Okay. It's going to encourage us to, number one, take care of ourselves, think more positively, and be open to others that we see out in public and not look away because they may look or act different than we do. I am going to take you back a step. We talked about the fact that you met your wife when you were in your 50s. Did you ever anticipate that you were going to fall in love and have a family?
No, never. Absolutely never. In fact, the way I met my wife was I was looking for a person that could act as my aide on weekends to basically help me with my physical needs. And I put an ad in a paper, and my wife answered it. And she came to work for me as my weekend aide. And the more we got to know each other, the more our relationship developed into one of more than just a personal care aide. But, we saw that we really liked each other a lot. And our relationship developed. And I originally told my wife that I would never even consider marriage. I just didn't think with my disability that it would be fair to the woman to marry me. And one of my aunts named Betty encouraged me not to feel that way. She said that I still have a lot to offer people and that it should be up to the woman to decide what's best for her. And the more my wife, Anna, and I got to know each other, the more we agreed with right for each other and that we have a future together. And I was so fortunate that we got married in 2003. And I might add, it was actually my wife who proposed to me.
I love it. I love that.
Yeah, she was actually the one that proposed.
And, again, I just find it so positive and so enlightening that we live in this world where we are so judgmental, and yet there are kind, wonderful people like your wife who saw more than just somebody that she was going to take care of physically, that there was a relationship, that you two connected in different ways. And I think we've got to do that more and more in our communities. And it's interesting that that's how your relationship developed, because I have a friend who is now in his 50s. When he was all of about 2 weeks old, his family was in a head-on car crash.
Mm.
His older brother was in the back seat, no harm to him. He at the time was sitting in this one of those little car seats that have nothing to do with car seats today, and he went flying out of it and out of the car. His father survived with some injuries. His mother died from the car crash. He almost died, but he survived. And the father couldn't raise the two boys on his own. So he found a housekeeper. And the housekeeper came and took care of the boys. And they too developed a relationship over the years. And this beautiful Jamaican woman became the stepmom to these two little boys and a beautiful wife. And I've met her online. And when I find people like this, that they come out of the heart, it's their heart that works. But you have to have a big heart too, that you aren't sitting there saying, oh, woe is me. You're accepting.
Thank you. Well, I have to say that I got that from my family. I mean, growing up, my family, fortunately or unfortunately, I guess unfortunately, had to deal with a lot of adversity during our lives, but fortunately, they were able to not only survive the adversity, but to flourish. Just to tell you a little bit more about my background, my mother died when I was less than 1 month old. It was in 1950 during the polio epidemic.
Oh
She
my.
caught polio, as did my older brother, Steve. And unfortunately, my mother died when I was less than a month old. My brother Steve had polio as well, but he fortunately recovered, was totally recovered, and became a very good athlete in his own right. So, my father remarried later, years later, and that's where my sister was born through his second marriage. Unfortunately, that marriage did not work out well. They got divorced, and my father married for the third time shortly before my injury. I have an aunt when I was growing up who had multiple sclerosis, and I used to see my grandmother help with her care, quite frequently. So my family dealt with a lot of adversity throughout many, many years, and I got to see how they dealt with it. And it encouraged me to see that there's a lot people can still do, despite what their circumstances are, and how important it is to help each other. And the importance of family was ingrained in my upbringing at a very early age.
And I'm sure you've ingrained that into your triplets as well.
You bet. And what I've tried to encourage them is the importance of helping each other. All right. To know that we all help each other. We work together as a family. And in fact, in growing up, for my wife to care for three babies and me at the same time, we really needed to work with each other
I'm
and
sure.
help each other. My boys are now 19 years old. They're going to turn 20 next month. In
Wow.
January, they'll turn 20. They're currently sophomores at three different schools in upstate New York, not only doing tremendously well, but they're staying really, really close with each other. They're each other's best friends, and they know they can count on each other for whatever help they need.
And, I hope our listeners get that message, how important our families really are. I feel very grateful. I have two older brothers, and growing up, there was a big enough age span between us that I won't say we weren't close, but we weren't as close as we are now. And yet, one lives on the East Coast, one lives on the West Coast, and I live in the Midwest. And yet, we stay in touch with each other, we connect with each other. And that was something that my parents taught us. My mother once said to me, you may think your brothers don't love you, but someday you're going to find out that they like you. And I wrote a piece to my mother, and hopefully she hears it in the heavens above. And I said, my brothers actually love me, Mom, and I'm grateful. So I hope your boys continue to keep up that relationship, support you and your wife.
Thank you.
So before
And
we end this, what are your words that you want our listeners to hear so that we can be nicer and kinder to others who just don't look like us?
you know, what I found that's helped me most to feel better about myself was when I had the opportunity to help others. I found that when I had the opportunity to give back to others, my first job working as a rehab counselor did wonders for me because now I was in a position to help others. And that improved my self-esteem, my self-confidence, my feelings of self-worth. And I think that applies to everyone. When you know you can be a benefit and of help to others, it does wonders for how you feel about yourself. And if we all work together to help each other, we all thrive and benefit by it.
You are absolutely correct. Well, I hope the corporations out there understand that people with disabilities can make good employees. We have to stop judging people by what we think they can do and what we think they can't do. Let's give everybody a chance. Ken,
If I could just add
sure.
something to that, if we have a moment. I used to work after my job as a rehab counselor. I later went to law school and worked for more than 40 years as an assistant district attorney. And in my job as an assistant district attorney, when we would leave the office, our office had a policy that you'd go through an exit interview. And in the exit interview, you talk about what you like best about the job and what you felt could be improved about the job. And I was told on a number of occasions that what my fellow ADAs said they liked best about the job was meeting, working with, and getting to know me. Now, I say that not to boast or brag. I say that because what they were referring to was meeting, working with on a daily basis someone with a disability. Because unless they had a relative with a disability, people rarely came in contact with someone on a daily basis with a disability. And they found that it was a revelation to them what it was like to have close contact with somebody with a disability and to see that we are no different than they are. We have the same needs, wants, desires, that we are hardworking, that we're loyal, dedicated employees and friends. And they felt that benefited them to see that and get to work with somebody with a disability. And I think that needs to be encouraged in a lot of areas, in a lot of jobs, and let employers know this is what helps everybody
You
to
are.
give somebody with a disability the opportunity to show what they can do. It helps us all.
Well, thank you so very, very much. Best wishes to you and your family this holiday season. And we're going to have all this information in the show notes along with how to get your book. Thank you.
Great.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
day. Bye bye
You
now.
too. Bye.